Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
No matter how you look at it, animal agriculture helps Nebraska's economy. The livestock industry provides increased tax revenues for schools and community services. Livestock enterprises also create jobs while contributing to existing businesses such as local banks and grocery stores. A thriving livestock industry helps maintain our current way of life, but also provides opportunities for the next generation of farm families. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff helps to raise awareness of the importance of animal agriculture to Nebraska.
Market Journal, television for making agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Wade Johannes analyzes corn and soybean markets. Jenny Nixon talks with us about a recent snowstorm which killed thousands of cattle in South Dakota and Nebraska. Kurtis Harms looks at windbreak damage due to drought and pine wilt. And Lowell Sandell discusses controlling winter annual weeds. Washington reopened this week. Congress passed a bill to fund the government until January 15th and raise the debt ceiling until February 7th. The USDA announced it would either cancel or postpone reports it missed or were coming this week. Most notably, the agency has canceled the October crop report. The next supply and demand estimates will come in next month's report, scheduled for November 8th. Before we get to markets, we've spent time the last two shows talking about renewable fuels and the renewable fuel standard. You might remember we noted the EPA has the authority to waive mandates as debated during the drought of 2012. Well, according to reports, the EPA is considering doing just that for 2014. Reuters says it has seen an EPA draft proposal that would scale back corn-based ethanol usage in 2014 from 14.4 billion gallons to 13 billion gallons. Overall, the proposed cut in the biofuel mandate is reported to be almost 3 billion gallons. The news agency says the blend wall is a large part of the rollback. The blend wall is the 10% usage threshold of ethanol in gasoline. A recent Cornhusker Economics article says the 14.4 billion gallon corn-based ethanol target exceeds the maximum use of E10 gas by 7%. The limitations of moving the blend wall with E85 or E30 or E15 are partly in automotive demand. Only about 3,000 of the 160,000 gas stations in the U.S. have E85 pumps, and only 3% of vehicles have flex fuel engines. And even if drivers want to opt for E15, those pumps are fewer in number than E85. It's important to note Secretary of Ag Tom Vilsack has said the EPA hasn't reached a final decision yet and won't do so until all stakeholders have had the opportunity to comment. Wade Johannes from Central Valley Ag is our marketing analyst this week. Rain on Monday put a halt to combining for many farmers in the eastern section of Nebraska. We talked with Wade at CVA's East Hub in Oakland Wednesday afternoon and started by asking about the harvest progress in northeast Nebraska.
Well, here in northeast Nebraska, we're probably about 2/3 done on soybeans. Had a really nice rain on Monday, and then so we'll have a few days off here to kind of catch our breath. But corn pretty much just getting started, 10-15%, I'd say.
What do the numbers look like?
A lot better than what people thought. Generally speaking, soybeans and corn are better than anyone expected.
Can you get a feel for what the size of this crop looks like across the country? I mean, obviously there aren't any USDA reports, so it probably makes it hard.
Yeah, it's going to be difficult, but just going off of the latest USDA numbers from September, a 155 average yield in corn, 41 in soybeans, those are going to come up. And so the big question is, when the USDA is going to come out with their next numbers, and then how much are they going to jump those yield estimates. But, it's going to be a record crop in corn. Could be 14 billion bushels for soybeans, 3.1, 3.2, somewhere in there. So a very solid crop, a lot better than what we were thinking just a month ago.
In corn, do you think we've reached a point where maybe this is a floor, or do you think there's a little ways further to go?
It would be nice, Jeff, but the thing is we're going so long before the USDA updates us with their estimates. And if they come out with a big surprise, like a 160 average yield, you know, a 5-bushel jump, it's going to drop some more. And that is a possibility, just hearing yield estimates across the country.
Do you think this market is capable of handling, I mean, you know, this is a huge crop, the biggest crop we've ever seen in corn, and the demand market has probably been shaved off a little bit after the drought last year. Is it capable of generating something to get around 5 again?
It is possible. It's going to depend on how low we go here this fall. And then, you know, you look at the 3 buckets of demand in terms of corn. You know, exports, we're here in China sniffing around and buying corn here this week. So we expect that to pick up. Livestock, I mean, we haven't seen these prices at harvest in 3 to 4 years. So livestock will definitely load up. And then ethanol is making very good money right now. So they have all the incentive in the world to keep grinding.
When you look at that futures market and you see that December corn contract for 2014 is somewhere around 40 cents higher than December of this year, what does that tell you? How do you read into that?
Well, the thing we need to remember is that the cost of production is going down for the 2014 crop. Now, you know, there are some individual cases where cash rents are a little bit higher, so that's a general statement. But looking at the cost of production, it's going to be cheaper to raise corn this year than it did 2 years ago if you're in rotation. So that 480, 485 level locks in a pretty good profit for 2014.
What about for this year? For cash and basis, figuring those things in, if you got around what level would you try to be aggressive in selling?
Well, it depends what you've done so far. And, you know, we encourage guys to make earlier sales because it takes pressure off of being here at harvest and having 0% sold. So if you had earlier sales on, you know, then you don't feel the pressure to make an all or nothing type sale decision. But, you know, even with the levels we're at around 450 futures, you know, there's still profit there for most operations, just if you're 0% sold and looking at the size of production for 2013 crop.
Do you feel there's a possibility for beans to get above 13, whether it be on cash or maybe in the futures contracts as well?
I think there's going to be a post-harvest bump. I think it probably be short-lived though. So I'd be taking advantage of a 50-60 cent rally in soybeans and just cashing out, moving on to next year.
That South American news is bound to come at some point.
That's right. That's right. It's hanging over us, and you know, it's going to take a major weather crisis to get the market concerned about their crop this year.
What does the export market look like for soybeans right now?
It's picking up again. Here the last couple of weeks, even with the USDA being away from the desk, they have been picking up, and that's a seasonal trend. But here through the end of the year, they're saying that, you know, we could possibly export as many as 700 million bushels of soybeans, which we're going to need to see in terms of demand.
Next week, University of Missouri Extension ag economist Ron Plain will join us to look at hog markets. By now, you probably know of a recent storm that moved across western Nebraska and South Dakota, killing thousands of cattle along the way. The losses are made worse by the lack of a livestock indemnity program within a farm bill and by FSA offices being closed as a consequence of the government shutdown. Earlier this week, we talked with Jenny Nixon, a UNL Extension educator in Sioux County, about how that snow and rain caused so many problems for farmers and ranchers in that area. For perspective, Sioux County is the northernmost and westernmost county in Nebraska and borders both Wyoming and South Dakota.
You know, we normally expect our first snows in the Panhandle to occur about Halloween, and so we had a very early snowstorm and in fact a blizzard come in the first part of October. We were a little bit unprepared for that. First of all, we had about 2 inches of rain ahead of the blizzard, and the cattle had not yet put on a full winter coat. A lot of the trees are the same way. You were dealing with, you know, trees that just aren't ready for winter. And so everything was kind of going into this a little bit unexpected. We had 60-mile-an-hour winds and a lot of snow, and it was lately predicted. It was very late in the prediction. I
know it's early yet, but have you been able to get a handle on the numbers, the quantity of losses that have been suffered out there?
You know, that's a little difficult to get yet. We're still working on that. But for some people, they lost a lot of livestock. Some people lost in the 40 to 50, 60, and even 80% of livestock. And that is fairly catastrophic for anybody.
What happened there, Jenny? Was it they were out on pastures, and just give me an idea of kind of how they lost those livestock?
Most of our livestock is still out on summer pasture, and those pastures tend to not be as well protected as our winter pastures. And so cattle are out in the open. In some cases, the cows had just been weaned. The calves were off, and the cows were still wandering around and looking for their calves and not spending a lot of time eating, and so didn't have as much energy as they needed. As the storm came on, cows obviously turned their tails into the wind and they drift ahead of the wind. And when they got stuck or hung up in fences, they piled up on each other. Sometimes they fell into canyons and got covered over. But even livestock that was close to barns or hay bales or something like that, sometimes seeking that protection, got covered over. It was just a lot of weather to deal with all at one time.
Both departments of Ag in South Dakota and Nebraska are encouraging producers to document their losses. What's your recommendation about how people go about doing that?
Well, we've got about 4 or 5 different things we hope that livestock producers will do. First of all, use a camera with a date stamp that's turned on to document losses. Make sure that you've got somebody reputable to help you document those losses. Call your insurance agent, your bankers, your extension educators, people like that who can help you verify those losses. Even your neighbor will do, as long as you're not verifying for each other. Make sure that you keep specific records on the type of livestock that is lost. Is it a replacement heifer? Is it an old cow? Is it a bull? What's the type of livestock lost? And I would make sure that you contact your insurance agent, even if you don't have an insurance policy on those livestock. Make sure your ag lenders know what's going on. And now that we're back in session, get a hold of your local FSA office.
There's obviously going to be a big job of disposing of all the dead livestock here. What's the recommendation, or what options do producers have for disposing of those animals?
Well, the Department of Environmental Quality has 4 disposal methods for folks to be able to use, and that's all readily available on their website if they want to look that up. The 4 options were, well, rendering is the first one, and it's out after the 3rd day, so rendering is no longer available to us. We have burial under a 4-foot soil cover. You can incinerate, or you can compost animals. And obviously the biggest problem is that we can't get to these animals. So it's going to be a long process. This is obviously going to be a multi-million-dollar problem as you go from South Dakota into Nebraska. But more than that, it's, as it is with many farmers, especially for ranchers out there, this is most likely their identity. This is what they've been doing for a number of years. It's what their families have been doing for a number of years. I have to imagine that these losses are also taking an emotional toll on those operations. This is like a loss in the family. Losses like this are very difficult to take, very emotional. We have a bond with our livestock, and we realize that. They depend on us, and we feel like we've let them down. And this is our whole life. Depending on what class of cattle that you may have lost, or sheep or goats, we've lost a lot of different things, and even horses. These are our friends, and we've cared for them for a long time, and it feels like a loss in the family. And the Panhandle received more rain on top of that damaging storm. Some of that region is now out of drought, while most of it remains in D1 to D2 classification. The Lower Platte North Natural Resources District has placed a 180-day stay on new well drilling and expansion of irrigated acres. On its website, the Lower Platte North NRD said the temporary stay is intended to serve as a timeout while the NRD considers changes to its policies. The district says for the 2nd year in a row, requests for new irrigated acres far exceed available allocations. The NRD also says it received numerous reports of domestic wells going dry, especially in the Bruno, Brainerd, and David City area of Butler County. A public hearing is tentatively set for December 9th to discuss changes. The stay will automatically expire on April 12, 2014 if the district takes no action. Windbreaks are an important part of Nebraska's ag landscape. Established windbreaks protect against wind, soil erosion, and help in snow management. Over the last couple of years, however, environmental pressures may have damaged trees. Kurtis reports on the problems landowners in the state may be experiencing.
By taking a quick trip through Nebraska, it may be easy to spot dead or dying trees in windbreaks. These damaged trees may be even more prevalent now due to back-to-back years of drought stress. Dennis Adams is an extension forester with the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. He says younger seedling trees are more susceptible to drought damage than older trees because older trees are usually more established in the soil. However, because of last year's drought, Adams noticed damage in older trees early on in the spring.
One of the things I've noticed about trees this year is the growth this year, when the buds broke and the new growth came out, was a lot weaker than it would normally be. So the new leader growth is quite a bit smaller and the trees are they're still under a lot of stress.
Adams says the drought has been especially difficult for spruces, firs, and white pines, and people may see these trees browning and dying in their windbreaks. If landowners notice pine trees going from green to completely brown and dead in only a few weeks, drought may not be the culprit.
That is probably a disease called pine wilt, and it mostly affects Scotch pine, but it can affect Austrian pine and some other pines also. But probably the dead trees people are seeing around in windbreaks and landscape trees that are large trees is pine wilt.
Pine wilt is caused by microscopic nematodes. These nematodes are spread from one tree to another by the pine sawyer beetle, which feeds on the twigs and branches of the trees.
And then it causes wounds in the tree, and the nematode gets off of the insect and gets in the tree and multiplies quite rapidly, so it effectively shuts off the vascular system in the tree, so water can't be conducted in the tree, and the tree basically just dries up. Then when the tree is infected with nematodes, when the larvae in the tree mature and the beetles come out, the beetles carry the nematodes out of that tree and carry them onto another tree, and the whole cycle carries on.
Pine wilt easily transfers from tree to tree and can quickly kill established windbreaks. While all pine trees are susceptible to the nematodes that cause pine wilt, it's the exotic species, like Scotch and Austrian pine, which experience the most damage.
The native trees like ponderosa pine and white pine that are native to the United States don't seem to be nearly as affected with pine wilt.
Adams predicts that Scotch pine may someday be completely eliminated from the state because it is the most susceptible to pine wilt and it's difficult to treat. The best way to control pine wilt is to prevent the disease from spreading.
Cutting the infected trees out and either chipping them or burying them or burning them, and that basically gets rid of the insect. So that's the only real treatment, is to slow down the spread of the disease.
When filling in gaps in windbreaks caused by drought or pine wilt, it's recommended to use a variety of tree species. This will prevent the entire tree stand from being affected should a pest or disease emerge. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Kurtis Harms.
Thanks, Kurtis. Should landowners notice problems with pine wilt, you have until spring to control the spread. The insects causing the disease won't emerge over winter. You can visit our website for more information on this issue. The University of Nebraska-Lincoln and Bayer Crop Science have partnered to develop new soybean varieties. In the October Nebraska Farmer, you can read about the licensing agreement between Bayer and New Tech Ventures, which is the technology commercialization arm of the university. The key goal of the collaborative work will be to improve soybean yield and develop new soybean traits for Nebraska and throughout the world. The agreement also will provide additional research experience and training for graduate and undergraduate students. George Graff, a professor of agronomy and horticulture at UNL, said support from the state's soybean growers and the Nebraska Soybean Board have helped develop the high-quality soybean breeding program. You can read more about the agreement in the October Nebraska Farmer. Harvest was put on hold in some areas of the state as the week began. Storms dumped significant amounts of rain, especially in northeast Nebraska, where 2 to 3 inches fell. As Lowell Sandell said when we talked Tuesday, that could lend much more help to winter weed growth than the lack of precipitation experienced last year.
The drought of 2012, we had very dry conditions during the winter annual germination period. So on a relative basis, I think our populations of winter annuals in 2013 was relatively low. But you know, we've had plenty of rain here this fall, and we're seeing quite a bit of henbit and mare's tail germination occurring right now.
Compare mare's tail from what it was last year, what you kind of saw in the fields, and what it could be like going forward.
Yeah, you know, mare's tail is one of those that sometimes it's a little hard to really define it. as a winter annual or summer annual. Here in Nebraska, we have data that suggests it's still primarily a fall emerger. You talk to some folks in other areas in the Midwest, and it can emerge throughout the spring and summer. But that being said, we're seeing quite a bit of mare's tail germination here this fall, and taking steps to control that here this fall probably pay dividends in 2014.
You know, based on, if you don't know maybe necessarily what you're going to put in next year, what are some things that might help you control that, or what are your options there for treatment?
Yeah, we consider a lot of or most of the mare's tail in the state in production fields to probably be glyphosate resistant. We do think that the inclusion of or use of 2,4-D and or dicamba in fall applications is pretty important for adequate control. If growers want to tank mix or use other modes of action and keep the rotation options open, they could tank mix either Sharpen or Sencor with that here in the fall, and get a little bit of residual along with the good control from 2,4-D.
What are some things that you could be seeing from the combine as you make your way through the field? Possibly some water hemp. What else could be out there that you might make note of?
Yeah, so we really encourage folks to kind of scout with the combine. You're seeing where some problems may have occurred this year with species like water hemp or Palmer amaranth and some of those. And right now is a great time to start thinking about 2014 weed control. If there were some problems with water hemp, I know we've gotten a lot of questions on that. Thinking about a diversified program for 2014. Right now is a great time to start thinking about that as the combines are going through the field.
So you mentioned that some of these weeds have gotten a good jump. We have a lot more moisture than we had last year. You can probably notice it in some of the fields as we're out here today. What does your data suggest as to when these when these weeds will be up in the field and when you need to start controlling them by?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, some of our data on emergence would suggest that about November 1, most of what's going to come up will have come up at that point, and targeting fall applications real late October or throughout the first half of November, maybe even into the end of November if weather conditions are good, is probably about the best time to control or make fall applications for winter annual weeds.
Regarding Palmer amaranth, UNL greenhouse studies have confirmed a Palmer amaranth population resistant to post-emergence application of atrazine and HPPD inhibiting herbicides. It's the second report of the weed's resistance. The first was in Kansas. UNL Extension educators say integrated weed management strategies, including crop rotation, tillage, and a systems approach using residual herbicides followed by post-herbicides with different modes of action, will be required for control of the resistant weed. Now with this week's weather forecast, here's UNL Extension State Climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here again for the weekly forecast. Before we get to the main look at this next 7 days, let's take a look at what happened during this last week. Once again, we had another significant storm system roll through the Central Plains, basically emerged from the Central Rockies and then moved toward the Northeast. And many of the locations that were impacted during the first big snowstorm and rainmaker of the month were hit once again with this precipitation. We had over 2 inches of moisture, very common across northeast Nebraska. We had in excess of an inch in many locations in the northern half of the Panhandle, and we've seen totals varying anywhere from a half an inch to an inch and a half across a good portion of east central and southeast Nebraska. Unfortunately, the areas that most desperately need the precipitation, the southwest, west central Nebraska, although they did get some precipitation, fell well short of what many of the other locations in the state have been receiving. So through the first half of the month, we have numerous locations in northeast Nebraska, portions of south central Nebraska, and in east central Nebraska that have received at least twice their normal October precipitation, and quite a few locations now pushing up, particularly around the Norfolk area, 3 times their normal October precipitation. So we could use a dry spell. Is that in the forecast? Well, let's take a look at the upper models and see whether or not we can see some decent harvest activity weather. And the first thing I'll draw your attention to is we have a fairly significant trough that has been building and will continue to build over the next few days across the eastern United States. And this allows the cool air to move into our region. And we should have quite a bit of frequency of little frontal passages passing through. But since everything's coming from the northwest, we now have no moisture coming in from the Gulf of Mexico at the lower levels of the atmosphere. So any precipitation that does fall is going to be exceptionally light. In fact, during the 7-day period, quantitative precipitation forecasts for the entire state paint anywhere from just a trace to up to 1/4 of an inch, and most of that has been situated in northeastern Nebraska, where it is in a direct line with the systems that are moving from the southwest. So as we go into tomorrow, we will see that the trough kind of backs up a little bit, and we end a little bit of energy that's going to try to push southward. And as we get into Monday, it really is going to strengthen and pull down some very cold air into the region, and we may have the chance for some scattered precipitation from Sunday night through Monday morning, particularly across northeastern and northern Nebraska. Be isolated sprinkles, possibly even mixed with a little bit of wet snow during the coldest part of the evening hours. Now, as we go into Tuesday, that system will start to shift the energy to the east of us. We'll still see a cold fetch coming into our region, and we expect exceptionally cold air. But then things start to ease up. We start to see that trough move to the east, and a ridge starts to build in, and it becomes very dramatic as we get into Thursday. And then as we get into Friday, we see that all that cold air moves off the Great Lakes. So if we look at the temperature forecast, looking at some very cold temperatures in the northeast part of the state, much warmer to the west during this weekend. We do have this just slight chances of sprinkles. And then we see that coldest temperatures during the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday time frame before we see that slow warm up as we get into the weekend. Now, as we go a little bit farther out, we do notice that they are forecasting for next Thursday, the following Tuesday, a large area of below normal temperatures, and in terms of precipitation above normal. And this is in response to a potential storm system that may be developing as we get toward the end of the month. And the models are all over the place, but just a forewarning that if this does develop, it could be just as significant as some of the previous storms we've seen this month.
Thanks, Al. Today's interviews with Wade Johannes, Jenny Nixon, Lowell Sandell, and our feature on tree damage and windbreaks are available individually on the Market Journal website and through our mobile app as part of the October 18th episode of Market Journal. Next week, Ron Plain will be our marketing analyst. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
Animal agriculture is vital to Nebraska. Livestock production not only contributes to our food supply, but also helps our rural communities. Livestock provides revenue for schools, creates jobs, supports Main Street, and enhances the future for farm families. The Nebraska Soybean Board's Animal Agriculture Initiative works to encourage growth of responsible livestock enterprises to benefit agriculture and Nebraska.